My son left me a voice note. Dad, clear out your room. Vanessa needs a home office and, honestly, you're always in the way. It's time you figured out your own situation. I listened to it twice, standing in the garage I'd built with my own hands 22 years ago, surrounded by the half-restored vintage radios I'd been collecting since before he was born. Then I set my phone face down on the workbench, picked up a soldering iron, and smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, it did. I smiled because I finally understood exactly what I was dealing with, and I already knew what came next. Within 90 days, my son and his wife had lost their car, defaulted on 2 loans, filed for bankruptcy protection, and were sleeping in a rented room above a laundromat in East Knoxville. I was sitting on the back porch of a new house I'd bought with cash, drinking coffee with a woman who actually liked me, watching the sun come up over the Smoky Mountains. That's the end of the story. Now let me tell you how we got there. My name is Frank Harmon. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the state of Tennessee, mostly designing drainage infrastructure and bridge supports, the kind of work that nobody notices until it fails. I retired 4 years ago with a comfortable pension, a rental property portfolio I'd built quietly over 2 decades, and a house on Whitfield Lane in West Knoxville that I'd bought as a shell in 2001 and renovated almost entirely by myself over 5 years. 4 bedrooms, a workshop garage, half an acre of yard, and a wraparound porch I designed and framed myself. Appraised at $580,000 last spring. I know every pipe, every joist, every circuit in that house. I built it for a family, back when I thought I understood what family meant. My son Derek is 35. He sells enterprise software for a mid-sized company out of Atlanta, which means he works from home, earns a fluctuating commission-based income, and spends a significant amount of time on calls that sound important but never seem to produce stability. He's smart enough, personable in the way salespeople learn to be, and somewhere along the way became a man I struggled to recognize. I don't blame him entirely. I blame the woman who spent 3 years teaching him that his father was an obstacle rather than a person. Vanessa came into our lives at Derek's company retreat, which she attended as a guest. She was 31, polished in the way people who curate their image very carefully tend to be, with a YouTube channel called Aligned Living, where she posted videos about mindset, boundaries, and protecting your energy. 11,000 subscribers when they met. She called herself a life coach, though her certification came from a weekend online course, and her actual coaching client list never exceeded 6 paying customers at a time. What she was, genuinely, was a woman who had built her identity around the language of self-care while having very little care for anyone outside herself. I recognized it slowly, the way you recognize a slow leak not until the damage is already significant. They moved in 2 years ago. Derek called it temporary. Vanessa's apartment lease had ended. They were reassessing their housing situation, and would I mind if they stayed a few months while they figured things out? I had 3 empty bedrooms. I said yes. I believed in family. I believed in my son. The first year was manageable. Uncomfortable at times, but manageable. Vanessa set up her filming equipment in the living room and recorded content for hours while I found reasons to stay in the workshop. She made comments about my radio collection taking up too much space in the garage. Derek would wince and change the subject. I let it go. I told myself it was an adjustment period. The second year was something else. Vanessa's comments stopped being passing observations and started being policy declarations. She reorganized the kitchen without asking and threw away a cast iron skillet I'd had for 20 years because it had bad energy from negative cooking experiences. I'm not making that up. She said that. She began referring to the house as our home in her YouTube videos, showing off the kitchen she'd rearranged and the living room she'd redone with throw pillows. She charged to a credit card I later found was in a default spiral. She posted about creating sanctuary in a shared space while simultaneously making clear to Derek that sharing a space with me was something she endured rather than appreciated. The cruelest moments were always framed as concern. Derek, I worry about your dad being so isolated in that garage all the time. It's not healthy. Or, at the dinner table, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway, I read that older men who lose their sense of purpose can become depressive. Maybe he should look into senior programs. I was 62. I ran 4 miles 3 times a week. I was restoring a 1,947 Zenith console radio that required precision soldering work and a working knowledge of vacuum tube electronics. I was about as far from purposeless as a person can be. But Vanessa had a script, and in her script I was the declining, difficult father-in-law who needed to be managed out of the picture. Derek said nothing. That was the part that cost me sleep, not Vanessa's performance. My son's silence. 6 months ago, I met a woman named Carol at a continuing education class at the community college, woodworking, something I'd always wanted to learn properly. She was 58, recently retired from hospital administration, funny in a dry, understated way that I found enormously refreshing after years of living with Vanessa's performed enthusiasm. We had coffee after the 3rd class, then dinner. Then regular Tuesday evenings where we cooked together in her apartment and watched old movies and talked about things that had nothing to do with boundary setting or personal brand development. I made the mistake of mentioning her to Derek. Vanessa's reaction was a performance I almost admired in its commitment. She expressed concern, always wrapped in the language of care, about me moving too fast and potentially making myself vulnerable to someone whose intentions weren't clear. This from a woman who had moved into my house within 4 months of meeting my son. I pointed that out, calmly, once. The silence at the dinner table lasted the rest of the meal. 2 weeks later, I told them I'd like to have Carol over for dinner. Nothing formal, just an introduction. Vanessa stood up from the couch so fast her laptop slid onto the cushion. She crossed her arms and looked at me with an expression I recognized from her YouTube videos, the one she used when she was about to explain to her followers why a particular behavior was toxic. "Frank," she said, "not Dad, never Dad. I'm not comfortable with that. This is our home, and I have a right to feel safe in it." I kept my voice level. "This is my home, Vanessa. My name is on the deed. I'd like to have a guest. She's a stranger. She's someone I care about. I just think," and here she looked at Derek, a look I'd seen 100 times. The look that was really a command, dressed as a glance that it's too soon, and it makes us both uncomfortable. Derek was looking at his phone. I watched him feel my eyes on him and slowly look up. "Son," I said, "what do you think?" He set his phone down. He had the grace to look conflicted. "Dad, maybe she's right. It's a shared space. We should all be comfortable." I looked at my son for a long moment. The boy who used to help me in the workshop, who called me from his first apartment just to talk, who cried on my shoulder when his college girlfriend broke up with him and let me make him scrambled eggs at 11 at night without saying a word about it. That boy was still in there somewhere. But the man sitting across from me had learned to read Vanessa's signals faster than he read his own conscience. "All right," I said, and I went to the workshop. I worked until nearly midnight. I was cleaning the tuning capacitor on a 1953 Motorola tabletop radio when my phone buzzed. A voice note from Derek. I put in one earbud and played it. "Dad, clear out your room. Vanessa needs a home office, and honestly, you're always in the way. It's time you figured out your own situation." 34 words. I played it again. Then I set the phone down and went back to the capacitor. The work required my full attention, the kind of work where your hands have to be steadier than your feelings. I soldered a loose connection. I cleaned the contact points with a cotton swab dipped in isopropyl alcohol. I reinstalled the component, turned on the power supply, and listened to the radio, find a signal for the first time in probably 40 years. Clear and steady. Exactly what I needed to hear. I pulled up the contact for Raymond Oakes. Ray had handled my real estate transactions for 15 years. Estate attorney, property law specialist, the kind of man who answered texts after business hours because he'd built his reputation on being available when it mattered. We weren't friends exactly, but we had something that felt close to it. The mutual respect of two men who had worked together long enough to know each other's standards. I typed, "Ray need to meet this week. Property matters. Some urgency." He responded in 4 minutes. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring the deed." I locked up the workshop, walked past the closed bedroom door, the master bedroom, which I'd moved out of 18 months ago when Vanessa mentioned that older people sleep better in quieter rooms, meaning the smaller room at the back of the house. I'd accepted that too. I'd accepted so much, for so long, because I'd confused keeping peace with keeping family. I slept better than I'd expected. The next morning I was up at 5:30, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table going through the documents I kept in a fireproof box in the workshop. Property deed for 742 Whitfield Lane. Frank Harmon, sole owner. Tax records going back to 2001. Utility accounts, all in my name. Mortgage documents showing the final payoff receipt from 2019. Insurance policies listing me as the sole named insured. I'd been careful, over the years, for reasons I couldn't have fully articulated at the time. An instinct, maybe. Something from 31 years of engineering that understood. Always know exactly what you own and exactly what you've built. Ray's office was in a converted Victorian on Market Street, the kind of place that communicated competence without ostentation. He met me in the conference room with coffee already poured, reviewed the documents I'd brought, and listened to the voice note I played from my phone without changing his expression. "How long have they been there?" he asked. 2 years in March. "Any written agreement? Rent? Terms? Conditions?" "Nothing written. It was supposed to be temporary. And your name is the only name on anything that relates to this property. Every document, every account, every record." Ray leaned back. "Frank, this is straightforward. You are the sole owner of a property in which 2 adults are residing without payment and without a written agreement, establishing tenancy rights. Under Tennessee Code Annotated 667109, you can issue a written notice to vacate. Given that no rent has ever been paid and no tenancy agreement exists, a 30-day notice is more than legally required. We could argue for 14. He looked at me steadily. "You've made your decision?" The voice note made my decision. "Then let's do this correctly. I'll draft the notice today. Certified mail, posted to the address of record, dated tomorrow. That starts the clock." I signed the authorization papers at 11:15 a.m. By the time I drove to Carol's apartment for lunch, the machinery was in motion. I should tell you about the preparation that made all of this possible, because it didn't start with the voice note. It started about 14 months ago, when Vanessa filmed a YouTube video in my living room about creating intentional space and mentioned, to her 11,000 subscribers, that she and her husband were transforming a family property into something that truly served their vision. Not her father-in-law's house, a family property. As if language alone could transfer ownership. I'd visited Ray quietly on a Tuesday when Derek was on sales calls and Vanessa was at a content creation retreat in Gatlinburg. I told him I wanted a complete review of my estate documents, my property records, and the current legal status of anyone residing in my home. We spent 2 hours going through everything. Ray asked careful questions and made careful notes. At the end, he said, "You're well protected. Everything is clean. If circumstances change, you have a clear path." I thanked him and drove home and never said a word about it. I also hadn't mentioned, to anyone except Ray, that I'd been gradually transferring my radio collection to a storage unit I'd rented 6 months earlier. Not all of it enough to leave things looking normal, but the pieces that mattered most. The 1,947 Zenith, the 1,953 Motorola, the 1,960 Grundig console I'd spent 4 months restoring. Those were already safe. Small precautions. The kind of thing you do when you've spent 30 years designing systems that have to perform under stress. The notice arrived at the house via certified mail on a Thursday. I know because Derek called me 14 times between noon and 3 o'clock. I was at Carol's apartment, helping her sand and finish a side table she'd built in the woodworking class. My phone sat on the kitchen counter. Carol watched me ignore it with the quiet understanding I'd come to depend on. "Let me guess," she said. The notice arrived. "You going to answer?" "Not today." She handed me the sandpaper, finer grit for the top surface. I answered Derek's call at 7 p.m., on my terms, from Carol's porch, with a glass of iced tea in my hand. His voice came through tight and controlled in the way that means someone has been rehearsing. "Dad." "What is this? A notice to vacate? From your lawyer?" "It's exactly what it says. You and Vanessa have 30 days to either begin paying rent at the current market rate for the property, which Ray has determined to be $2,400 monthly, or to vacate the premises." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. This is our home." There it was. The same phrase Vanessa had used, the same claim without legal foundation. "We live here. We've been here for 2 years. You've been guests for 2 years, Derek. Guests I invited out of love and housed at considerable expense. But you left me a voice note telling me to clear out my room because I was in the way. So I'm taking your advice. I'm figuring out my own situation. Yours is now your responsibility. Silence on the line. This is because of Carol, he finally said. This is because of a voice note you sent at 11:47 p.m. telling your father to get out of his own bedroom. Vanessa said. He stopped. I know what Vanessa said. I've been hearing what Vanessa said for 2 years. What I haven't heard, not once, is what Derek thinks, what Derek feels, what Derek would say if he were alone and honest. I kept my voice even. You have 30 days. The market rate offer is fair. I'd suggest you call Ray if you want to discuss options. I hung up before he could answer. Through the screen door, I could hear Carol moving around in the kitchen, starting dinner. That small domestic sound, ordinary, warm, the sound of someone going about their evening without drama, felt like something I'd forgotten existed. That night, I went back to Whitfield Lane for what turned out to be one of the last times. I packed methodically. Personal documents, financial records, the remaining radios I hadn't yet moved to storage, my tools, my father's woodworking plans that I'd kept in a rolled canvas tube in the workshop since 1998. I packed 2 suitcases of clothes. I took the cast iron skillet Vanessa had thrown away, which I'd retrieved from the recycling bin and kept in the workshop. I left the furniture, the appliances, the fixtures. I left everything that belonged to the house. Derek came into the workshop while I was loading my truck. He looked like he hadn't slept. Vanessa was visible through the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching. Where are you going? He asked. I've found a rental. I'll be comfortable. Dad, you can't just leave. This is your house. It is, which is why I can do exactly what I'm doing. I closed the truck bed. Derek, do you remember what you said on that voice note? He looked at the driveway. I was frustrated. Vanessa was upset about the space situation, and you chose her frustration over my dignity. That's a choice. Choices produce consequences. This is the consequence. I opened the driver's door. The 30-day offer stands. If you want to pay rent and stay, call Ray. If you can't afford the rent, I suggest you start looking at listings. There are decent 2 bedrooms in Fountain City for under $1,200 a month. I drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see Vanessa coming out the front door, gesturing toward Derek. He stood in the driveway watching my truck until I turned the corner. The rental I'd arranged was a furnished 1-bedroom in a clean complex near the university, $1,050 a month, month to month. Nothing long-term, because I already had other plans. I set up my workshop space in the 2nd bathroom, which had a good counter and plenty of ventilation. I arranged the radios I'd brought with me on a set of shelves I bought at a hardware store. The apartment was small and quiet, and entirely mine. I slept 9 hours my first night there. The next morning, I called Margaret Chen at First American Bank. I'd known Margaret professionally for 12 years, a loan officer who'd helped me finance 2 of my rental properties. I told her I was calling regarding a co-signature arrangement I'd entered into 18 months earlier, a $28,000 personal loan Derek had taken out for what he called business development, which had produced no discernible business or development, and that I wished to formally notify the bank of changed circumstances and begin the process of removing myself as guarantor. Margaret was professional and thorough. She explained that the bank would conduct a re-evaluation of the primary borrower's creditworthiness within 7 to 10 business days. Derek and Vanessa would be notified by certified mail. Their options would be to secure a replacement guarantor, pay the balance in full, or face collection proceedings and credit consequences. She thanked me for the advance notice and said she'd begin the paperwork immediately. That same afternoon, I called Vanderbilt Federal Credit Union regarding a $17,500 auto loan for a Lexus NX that Vanessa drove and Derek had co-signed with my backing. The process was the same. Changed circumstances. Formal withdrawal of guarantee. Re-evaluation pending. Ray and I met again that Friday. He reviewed the status of the notices and confirmed that no payment had been received and no contact had been made to his office. He filed the preliminary eviction documents with Knox County Court. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Everything was running on schedule. That evening, Derek and Vanessa attempted a joint call. I let it go to voicemail. Vanessa's message was 12 minutes long. I'm not exaggerating, and covered. In order: her theory that I was acting out of jealousy over their relationship, her position that the house had become our family home through sustained habitation and emotional investment, a reference to a Tennessee legal concept she had clearly Googled and misunderstood, a threat to share our truth publicly, and a closing statement about how she had nothing but love for me despite everything. It was impressive in its way, a complete work of self-mythology. I saved the voicemail to a cloud folder labeled Evidence and forwarded the file path to Ray. The next 2 weeks were quiet on my end and evidently chaotic on theirs. Derek called 4 times. Vanessa called twice. A number I didn't recognize called 3 times, likely Vanessa's mother, who had once told Derek that I was a difficult personality after I'd asked her, politely, to stop letting herself into my house without knocking. I returned none of the calls. I went to my woodworking class. I had dinner with Carol twice. I worked on the 1953 Motorola, which had developed an intermittent static issue. I traced eventually to a cracked resistor. The satisfaction of finding the fault and correcting it with clean, precise work is something that doesn't really translate to description. You either understand it or you don't. What I found, in those quiet weeks, was that I had been carrying a weight I'd completely stopped noticing. The ambient tension of shared space with people who resented your presence. The constant low-level performance of being acceptable in your own home. The monitoring of every movement, every decision, every social arrangement, for whether it would create conflict. Without that weight, I felt lighter than I had in years. I started sleeping through the night. I started laughing at things again. Small things. The way you laugh when your nervous system isn't permanently on guard. Then came the bank letters. I know because Derek called at 7:30 in the morning, which meant he'd been awake when the certified mail arrived. I was drinking coffee. I answered. "The bank is calling the loan." His voice was different now. Not controlled. "You did this. I withdrew my co-signature guarantee. That's a right available to any guarantor when circumstances change. We can't pay $28,000, Dad. We don't have it. That's something you'll need to address with the bank." And the credit union sent a letter too. They want a new cosigner or payment in full within 14 days. I know. Their combined debt is destroying us. We'll lose everything. Derek. I set down my coffee cup. You've been living in my house for 2 years without paying rent, utilities, or any household expenses. I've calculated the total, including groceries, at approximately $68,000. I've asked you for nothing in return, except basic respect and consideration. When I asked for those things, your wife made videos about protecting her energy, and you left me a voice note telling me to get out of my bedroom. I did not create your financial situation. You did, with choices you made, with a lifestyle you couldn't afford without my subsidy. I paused. I hope you find a solution, but it's your problem to solve. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Vanessa's parents won't help. They're done with us. I'm sorry to hear that. Another silence. So you're really doing this? I already did it. 3 weeks ago. I heard him breathing. I heard, in the background, Vanessa's voice saying something I couldn't make out. Then he said, very quietly, "I don't know what to do." "I know," I said. "That's what happens when someone stops doing it for you." I ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet of my small apartment. The radios on the shelf picked up the morning light. The old ones, the 1940s and 1950s models, have a particular quality to them. The cabinets are usually walnut or mahogany, built when furniture was made to last, rather than made to trend. People threw them away for decades because they stopped working. I found them at estate sales, in storage units, in the back rooms of antique shops. Every one of them just needed someone to understand why they'd stopped working and care enough to fix it carefully. I found that work deeply satisfying in ways I'd never been able to explain to anyone except Carol, who had simply nodded and said, "That makes complete sense." The eviction hearing was on a Tuesday morning in March, Knox County Courthouse, 3rd floor, courtroom 7. Ray and I arrived early. Derek and Vanessa arrived a few minutes before the scheduled time with an attorney from a legal aid clinic, a young woman who looked competent and tired in equal measure, carrying more files than the case warranted. I didn't look at them. I reviewed my documents. Ray reviewed his notes. When they called our case, We filed in. Judge Robert Alcott was 67, a former real estate attorney himself, with the unhurried manner of someone who had heard every version of every property dispute and been surprised by none of them. Ray presented our case efficiently. Deed of sole ownership. 2 years of utility and tax records showing exclusive payment responsibility, the written 30-day notice, the certified mail receipt, the offer of market-rate rental terms, the complete absence of any payment or negotiation. Vanessa's attorney argued what she had to argue: hardship, good faith occupancy, the implicit family arrangement. She was articulate, and I had no quarrel with her professionalism. The facts simply weren't on her side. Judge Alcott asked Derek directly whether he had ever paid rent. Derek stood. "No, Your Honor." "Did you have a written agreement granting you tenancy rights?" "No, but we understood." "Mr. Harmon, legal rights are established by documentation and law, not by understandings. An assumption of indefinite residency does not create a tenancy right." He turned to review the exhibit. Ray had submitted printouts from Vanessa's YouTube channel, publicly available, showing the property featured in multiple videos as our home, and described as a space she was actively renovating and claiming. "Mrs. Harmon, are these your videos?" Vanessa stood. "Yes, Your Honor. I was simply..." "Did you at any point pay for any renovation, utility, tax, or maintenance expense related to this property?" A pause. "No, Your Honor, but I've heard enough." He reviewed the documents one final time. His ruling took approximately 4 sentences. Sole ownership established. No legal tenancy. Proper notice given and received. Plaintiff's request for possession granted. 21 days to vacate. The gavel came down. Vanessa made a sound I won't describe. Derek put his arm around her, and I could see, from where I sat, that his hand was trembling. Their attorney spoke quietly to them, probably explaining what came next and what didn't. Ray gathered our documents with the efficiency of someone who'd expected exactly this outcome. Outside in the corridor, I heard Vanessa's voice behind me. "You'll regret this. You're destroying your own son." And I stopped walking, turned around, and looked at her directly. "Vanessa," I said, "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped rebuilding it for you every time you knocked it down." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. In 2 years of living in the same house, it was the first time I'd seen her without a ready answer. Ray and I walked out into a cold March morning, the kind where the air is clean and the light is sharp and everything looks like it was just washed. He shook my hand in the parking lot. I thanked him. I drove to Carol's apartment and told her how it went. She made tea and we sat at her kitchen table, and I didn't feel triumphant exactly. I felt like a man who had put down something very heavy and was finally standing up straight again. They were out of the house within the 21 days. I know because my neighbor Judith, who had lived 3 doors down for 16 years, and who had watched all of this unfold with the quiet attention of a woman who kept her own counsel, texted me. "They left yesterday. Looked like they were going to a motel. The yard needs mowing." I texted back, "Thank you, Judith. I'll handle it." I listed the house with an agent the following week. Cash buyers only. Quick close. The first serious offer came within 10 days, a couple, both physicians at UT Medical Center, young, enthusiastic, full of plans for the yard and the kitchen. They offered $572,000. I countered at $585,000. We closed at $578,500. After the remaining balance on an equity line I'd opened for renovations in 2018, and after closing costs, I walked away with $491,000. I used $340,000 to buy a house in Maryville, 25 minutes south of Knoxville, backing up to a wooded ridge. 3 bedrooms, a proper detached workshop with a concrete floor and a 220-volt outlet for equipment, a covered back porch facing east, where the morning light comes in at an angle that makes everything look like a painting. I moved my radios in on a Saturday. Carol helped me arrange the shelves. We made chili on the new stove and ate on the porch in the late afternoon while the light changed in the trees. "You're smiling," she said. "I keep catching myself doing that. You should let yourself..." I thought about that. For a long time I had associated contentment with other people's comfort, as if my peace was only legitimate when everyone around me was satisfied first. That's a generous way to live, I suppose. If the people around you are also generous. When they're not, it becomes something else, a slow erasure. 6 weeks after I moved into the new house, I received a letter from the Knox County Bankruptcy Court. Derek and Vanessa had filed for Chapter 7 protection. Their listed debts totaled $62,400. Their combined assets? After the Lexus repossession and the liquidation of things Vanessa had been selling, online furniture, jewelry, her filming equipment, came to $14,200. The trustee would distribute the remainder to creditors. Their credit profiles would carry the bankruptcy notation for 7 years. Vanessa's Aligned Living channel, I noticed, had gone private. Its last public post, dated 3 weeks before the hearing, was a video called Protecting Yourself from Toxic Family Systems. It had 847 views. I didn't feel satisfaction about the bankruptcy. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't the outcome I designed for, it was the outcome their choices produced, independent of anything I'd done. I'd simply stopped being the wall between them and those choices. On a Wednesday evening in May, I was in the workshop, trying to diagnose a sticky tuning mechanism in a 1949 Philco floor console I'd found at an estate sale in Sevierville, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Something made me, Dad. Derek's voice was quiet, steady in a different way than before, not controlled, just tired. Genuinely tired. It's me. I'm using a friend's phone. I figured you'd block the others. I hadn't. But I wasn't answering them. Fair. A pause. I just wanted you to know Vanessa left. About 3 weeks ago. She met someone at the cafe where she was working. She moved to Charlotte with him. His voice didn't break. Exactly. But it wavered. I'm in a room in a shared house. I got a job at a logistics company. Account management. Base salary. No commission. It's not much, but it's steady. I'm seeing a therapist. Weekly. I set down the Philco tuner. I'm glad to hear about the therapist. She's helping me understand some things. About how I ended up where I ended up. Another pause. I'm not calling to ask for anything, Dad. I want you to know that. I know I don't have the right. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For the voice note. For the 2 years before it. For all of it. I went to the workshop doorway and stood looking out at the evening woods. The light was going amber in the upper branches. Somewhere in the trees a wood thrush was running through its song, that liquid, cascading call that sounds like water over stones. I hear you, I said. I don't expect anything from that. I just needed to say it. I know. I watched the light in the trees. Derek, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to actually hear it. I didn't do what I did to punish you. I did it because I finally understood that protecting you from consequences was teaching you that consequences weren't real. They are. I should have understood that sooner. That part is on me. I paused. The rest of it is on you. And it sounds like you're starting to understand that. Silence on the line. Then, yeah, slowly. Slowly is fine. Slow and real is worth more than fast and performed. He was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? Are you happy? I looked around the workshop, at the Philco on the bench waiting for diagnosis, at the shelves of radios I'd restored, each one found broken and made whole again through patience and attention. At the back porch I could see through the open door, and the woods beyond it going golden in the evening. I'm more than okay, I said. Good. His voice was very quiet. You deserve to be. So do you. That's the thing about consequences, son. They clear the ground. What you build after them is up to you. I didn't say more than that. I didn't promise dinners or holidays or a return to anything that had come before. Those conversations, if they were ever going to happen, would come later, after actions that matched words, after time that proved change rather than just declared it. Trust isn't rebuilt in a phone call. It's rebuilt in months and years of ordinary choices made differently. But I didn't hang up without saying goodbye, and I didn't delete the number. Summer came to the ridge behind my house in long, gradual days, the mornings cool and the evenings warm, the light stretching later and later into the evening. Carol came for weekends, and we got into the habit of Saturday markets, picking up produce, and whatever caught our attention and cooking elaborate dinners that often ran until well past midnight. She was learning to work with metal in a blacksmithing class and brought me a small bracket she'd made to hold one of my radios on the wall. It wasn't perfectly symmetrical. It was beautiful. I finished the 1,949 Philco in July. The sticky tuning had been a seized bearing in the flywheel assembly, nothing dramatic, just accumulated grime and a bearing that had dried out over 70 years. An hour of cleaning, a replacement bearing I ordered online for $4, and the tuner moved like it was new. I turned it on and dialed slowly across the AM band, past static and voice and music, the sounds of the present moving through a machine built in the past, and felt that particular satisfaction that I had no other name for except rightness. There are things I know now that I should have understood much earlier. I know that generosity without limits isn't love, it's enabling, and enabling is its own kind of harm. I know that silence in the face of contempt is not patience, it's permission. I know that the most dangerous version of a lie is the one you tell yourself, the one that says, if you just give a little more, absorb a little more, wait a little longer, something will change. Sometimes things only change when you stop absorbing them. I know that choosing yourself is not the same as choosing against the people you love. It's choosing the conditions under which love is possible. I chose those conditions. It cost me a son's temporary hatred and a house I'd built with my own hands. What it gave me was a life I actually inhabit rather than endure. The wood thrush is back in the ridge trees this fall, running its evening song. I sit on the porch with coffee and listen to it, and I don't think about everything that happened with the anger I used to carry. I think about it the way I think about a particularly difficult restoration, the Zenith from 1,947 that took me 8 months and required sourcing parts from 3 different states. The work was hard, and the result was something that ran perfectly, that would probably outlast me, that anyone with ears could recognize as working exactly as it was meant to work. That's what I'm doing now, running exactly as I was meant to. After 63 years, it turns out that's enough. If you found this story meaningful, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And click the box on the left for the next story.